I never thought I'd be dealing with hidden cameras in my bedroom at the age of 44, especially not ones installed by my own son. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges at you, and this one really tested my relationship with both my kids and their mom. I have two children, my 21-year-old son and my 17-year-old daughter. Their mom and I got married young, mainly because she was pregnant with our son. We were both immature and unprepared for marriage, so we ended up divorcing shortly after our daughter was born. Despite the split, we managed to co-parent well over the years. My son has always been, well, let's say he takes life pretty easy. School was never his thing. He struggled with basic classes and showed little interest in sports or other activities. I kept trying to motivate him, push him to work harder, but nothing seemed to stick. His mom, on the other hand, always defended his laid-back approach, saying he'd figure things out in his own time. He eventually made it to community college, which was better than nothing. Recently, through his mom's connections, he landed a job in HR at her friend's company. Things were looking up until the company hit financial troubles and had to let people go. My son was one of them. His mom insisted he move back in with me to save money. I wasn't keen on the idea. He was an adult and needed to learn to handle life's challenges. But she argued that parents should protect their kids from the world's harshness, not add to it. After some back and forth, I agreed. When he moved in, I made it clear this was temporary. He needed to actively job hunt and move out once he got his first paycheck. He agreed, but within days, the job search turned into endless hours on the couch with his phone or video games. Every time I tried to discuss it, his mom would tell me I was being too hard on him. What made things more complicated was that his mom and I had recently started dating again. After years of failed relationships with other people, we'd grown closer as friends and decided to give our relationship another try. We were even talking about moving in together. Everything seemed perfect until my son lost his job. I really wanted things to work with his mom this time around. We were both older, more mature, and knew what we wanted in life. But our old argument about how to handle our son kept coming up. She thought I was too harsh, while I believed her coddling was holding him back. It was the same fight we'd had since he was in middle school. His mom would defend him no matter what. If he didn't apply for jobs, she'd say the market was tough. If he spent all day playing games, she'd say he needed time to de-stress. I knew deep down that this approach wasn't helping him. He needed structure and motivation, not endless excuses. The real breaking point came when we threw a party for my daughter, who'd just gotten accepted into her dream college. She'd always been different from her brother. Not a genius, but hardworking and good at most things she tried. Where my son needed constant pushing just to pass classes, my daughter quietly worked toward her goals and achieved them. The party was meant to be a happy occasion, but I could see it was hard on my son. Everyone was celebrating my daughter's success, while he was unemployed and living on his parents' couch. I tried to be sensitive to this and spent some time with him during the party. We had what I thought was a good talk about his future and getting back on his feet. Our conversation seemed promising. He opened up about feeling lost and unsure about his path. I told him it was okay to feel that way, but reminded him that things would only change if he put in the effort. He seemed to understand, and for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful about his situation. That hope lasted exactly one day. The next morning, I came home early with a bad cold. When nobody answered the doorbell, I used the spare key and found my son in my office. He was on a stepladder, installing something in the corner of the room. When I got closer, I saw what it was, a small camera, barely visible unless you knew where to look. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own son, who I just had a heart-to-heart with the night before, was secretly installing surveillance equipment in my house. When I confronted him, he just stood there silently, refusing to explain himself. Every question I asked was met with silence, which only made me angrier. All my frustration came pouring out about his laziness, his lack of ambition, his willingness to take advantage of my help without putting in any effort of his own. I told him to pack his things and leave. I couldn't trust him anymore, and I didn't want someone in my house who would violate my privacy like that. Later that evening, I got a call from his mom. She was furious about me kicking him out, but what she said next floored me. She had asked him to install those cameras. At the party, she'd seen me being friendly with a female coworker and got suspicious. Instead of talking to me about her concerns, she convinced our son to spy on me. The conversation quickly spiraled into accusations about the past. She brought up our early marriage, claiming I treated our son differently because he was the reason we had to get married young. She said I favored our daughter and held a grudge against him. None of it was true. Yes, he frustrated me sometimes, but he was my son and I loved him. I just wanted him to reach his potential while his mom kept making excuses for him. The call ended badly. She was too emotional, mixing up past hurts with present fears, and wouldn't listen to reason. When I told my daughter about finding the cameras, I left out her mom's suspicions about cheating. She didn't need to know that part. But now both his mom and my son weren't speaking to me, and I had no idea how to fix this mess. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of everything. My calls went unanswered, my texts unread. The house felt empty without my son around, even though he'd mostly just been lying on the couch when he was here. My daughter tried to cheer me up, but she was busy preparing for college, and I didn't want to burden her with all this drama. What hurt the most wasn't just the cameras. It was that my son had agreed to install them. Sure, his mom had asked him to do it, but he could have said no. He could have told her it was wrong, or at least warned me about her suspicions. Instead, he chose to spy on me, and that felt like a betrayal from both of them. I kept thinking about my relationship with my son over the years. Had I really been unfair to him? Was I too hard on him? I thought back to all the times I'd pushed him to do better in school, to try harder in sports, to take life more seriously. But I did that because I cared, because I could see him wasting his potential. That's what parents are supposed to do, right? After a week of silence, I decided to visit their mom's apartment. I couldn't let things end like this. When I got there, my son's car was gone. Apparently, he had a job interview. At least that was something positive. His mom opened the door but didn't invite me in right away. We stood there awkwardly until I asked if we could talk. She let me in, and we sat in her living room. The same living room where we used to have family dinners when it was her week with the kids. Now it felt different, tense, uncomfortable. Neither of us knew how to start. Finally, she spoke. She told me about her last relationship, something she hadn't shared before. Her boyfriend of 2 years had cheated on her with one of her close friends. She found out when another friend showed her pictures of them together. The betrayal had hit her hard, especially coming from both her boyfriend and her friend. "When I saw you with that woman at the party," she said, laughing and standing so close. All those feelings came rushing back. I know it wasn't rational. I know I should have just asked you about it. But in that moment, all I could think about was not being blindsided again. I understood her fear, but I was still hurt. "We've known each other for over 20 years, I said. "You know I would never cheat. That coworker is just a friend. She's actually married to my college roommate. You could have just asked me about her." She started crying then. Not the dramatic kind, just quiet tears. She admitted she wasn't as ready for a relationship as she'd thought. The trust issues from her last breakup were still there, affecting how she saw everything. She was going to start therapy again, something she'd stopped a few months ago. We talked for hours that day. About our past, our kids, our mistakes. She told me she knew she babied our son too much, but she did it because she saw how my pushing affected him. She thought if one parent was always pushing, the other needed to be softer to balance things out. I shared my fears too, about our son never learning to stand on his own, about enabling his lack of ambition, about watching him waste his life waiting for things to magically get better. We both wanted what was best for him. We just had very different ideas about what that meant. When our son came home from his interview, he found both his parents waiting for him. He looked nervous, probably thinking he was in trouble. Instead, we all sat down and had an honest conversation. The kind we should have had years ago. He told us how he felt torn between us, trying to meet my expectations while not wanting to disappoint his mom. How watching his sister succeed so easily made him feel like a failure. How he agreed to install the cameras because he wanted to help his mom, but he felt terrible about betraying my trust. "I didn't know what to say when you caught me," he admitted. "I was ashamed, and I knew whatever I said would hurt either you or mom. So I said nothing." The interview, it turned out, had gone well. It was for an entry-level position at a small company, nothing fancy, but it was a start. His mom had been right about one thing. He didn't need to find his own path, just maybe with a little gentle guidance from both of us. We agreed to make some changes. His mom would continue with therapy to work on her trust issues. I would work on being more patient and understanding. Our son would move back in with me, but with clear goals and timelines this time. We wrote everything down: weekly job search targets, household responsibilities, savings goals. As for our relationship, his mom and I decided to put things on hold. We still cared about each other, maybe even loved each other, but we both needed time. She needed to heal from her past relationship and learn to trust again. I needed to be sure I could trust her too. After the camera incident, "Maybe we tried to rush things," she said. "We were so focused on recreating what we had when we were young. We didn't deal with who we are now." She was right. We jumped back into a relationship thinking that age had solved all our problems. But some issues were still there. How we raised our son, how we communicated, how we handled conflicts. We needed to work on those things before we could think about being together again. The next few weeks were better. Our son started his new job and began looking for his own apartment again. My daughter finished her college preparations, excited about starting her new adventure. Their mom and I kept things friendly, focusing on being good parents rather than trying to be a couple. One evening, as I helped our son look at apartment listings, he turned to me and said, "I'm sorry about the cameras, Dad. I should have said no." "Yes, you should have," I replied. "But I understand why you didn't. Just don't ever do anything like that again." He promised he wouldn't, and I believed him. Sometimes trust has to be rebuilt, whether it's between partners, parents and children, or even with yourself. We were all learning that lesson together. 3 years have passed since the hidden camera incident. Looking back now, I can see how that crisis actually helped our family grow stronger, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. My son stayed with me for another 2 months after our big talk. This time was different, though. He actually stuck to our agreement. Every morning, he'd get up for work, and in the evenings, he'd look for apartments. No more endless gaming sessions or excuses about the job market. He even started cooking dinner sometimes, saying he needed to learn before living on his own. His mom kept her word too. She went back to therapy and worked hard on her trust issues. We'd see each other at family dinners or when discussing things about the kids, and slowly, the awkwardness started to fade. We weren't a couple, but we were friends again, which felt right. My daughter thrived in college. She'd call home every week, telling us about her classes and new friends. She never took sides in our family drama, which showed how mature she'd become. Sometimes she'd visit for weekends, and we'd all have dinner together, me, her brother, and their mom. Those dinners were a bit stiff at first, but they got better with time. The biggest change was in my son. That entry-level job turned out to be good for him. His boss was patient but firm, kind of like what his mom and I should have been all along. He started learning about business operations, showing an interest I'd never seen before. Within a year, he got promoted to team leader. When he found his own apartment, I helped him move. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but he was proud because he'd found it and saved for it himself. That day, as we carried boxes up the stairs, he said something I'll never forget. "Thanks for not giving up on me, Dad. Even when you were mad, I knew you cared." His mom and I kept our distance romantically for almost 2 years. We'd see each other at family events or when something came up with the kids, but that was it. She dated a few people. I focused on work and my hobbies. It was good for us. We both needed to grow as individuals. Then last spring, something changed. We were both at my son's office party. He'd just gotten another promotion. As we watched him give a small speech to his team, she turned to me and said, "Remember when we thought he'd never find his way? Looks like he just needed to find it himself." That night, we talked for hours, like we used to when we were young. But this time, we were different people. She told me about her therapy journey, how she learned to trust again. I shared how I'd learned to stop trying to control everything, to let people find their own path. We started dating again, but slowly this time. No rush to move in together, no pressure to recreate our past. We went on proper dates, talked about our fears and hopes, and really got to know each other as the people we'd become. The kids noticed the change in us. My daughter, home from college one weekend, said we seemed happier, more relaxed around each other. My son joked that we were acting like teenagers, but I could tell he was pleased to see us getting along. 6 months ago, I proposed. Not because she was pregnant, or because we felt we had to, but because we wanted to. We had a small wedding last month, just family and close friends. Our son was my best man, and our daughter was her maid of honor. The ceremony was simple but perfect. Our daughter gave a speech about how love sometimes needs time to grow, and our son talked about how people can change if you give them the chance. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Now we're living together, all properly this time. The house feels different, warmer somehow. My son visits often, usually with news about another project at work or asking for advice about his own relationship. My daughter's finishing college soon, already having job offers lined up. Yesterday, my wife found an old camera while cleaning out her storage unit, the same type my son had tried to install years ago. We both laughed about it, which showed how far we'd come. She recycled it, saying she didn't need cameras anymore. She learned to trust her heart instead. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best changes. That day I found the hidden camera could have destroyed our family. Instead, it forced us to face our problems and grow from them. My son found his confidence, my wife found her strength, and I found patience. Sometimes you have to let things fall apart before they can come together better than before. Our family isn't perfect. We still have disagreements and bad days. But now we talk about things instead of hiding them. We support each other instead of making excuses. And most importantly, we trust each other, knowing that trust isn't about being perfect, but about being honest, even when it's hard. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. 23 years ago, we got married because we had to. This time, we got married because we chose to, and that has made all the difference.